your weed management options depend upon the desirable plants you have there. And then, of course, it depends on what weeds you have in that place as well. All right, so there we go. Landscape weed management. Weed management in tree and shrub beds, easy, pretty much. Weed management where you've got herbaceous plants, not as easy. All right, so we'll hit on a lot of this as we go. Now, one of the challenges in landscape settings and turf grass is you're dealing with a wide diversity of plant material. You're going to deal with annual weeds, you're going to deal with perennial weeds, herbaceous plants, and woody plants that can be quite weedy as well. And the weed management strategies for each of those is going to be a little bit different, right? As a general outline, we have a landscape weed management calendar, and you could plug in turfgrass weed management calendar right into this as well, because it's all based upon the life cycles of the weeds. Okay, so in the winter, you know, let's just start in the fall. Where are we now? Here in the fall is a great time to control a lot of perennial weeds. Why? What do the perennial weeds, including woody weeds, do to prepare for winter? Storage, right. And so, like a deciduous tree, okay, it doesn't just drop its leaves willy-nilly, right? It does something first. It mobilizes all of these stored carbohydrates and amino acids that it's taken all of this trouble to manufacture, and translocates those down into the stems and down into the roots. And herbaceous plants getting ready for winter, right, is translocating all of its energy down into the storage roots. All right. So if you have a perennial weed that has that life cycle, this is a good time of year to think about how controlling those weeds, because translocation patterns are going down into the roots. And a lot of our weed control practices work better at this time of year as opposed to in the spring. All right. So in the fall is a great time to look at that. Also, winter annual weeds are coming up now, especially with all this rain we've had. I'm seeing just in the past week a huge explosion of winter annual weeds, a henbit, chickweed, annual bluegrass, are all popping up. Okay. So we use pre-emergence herbicides. Typically, we try to get those on by September 1. So has this ship sailed? Only partially. It's just leaving the dock now. But there's still a lot more winter annual weeds to come. So we haven't missed it completely, but now we have to deal with post-emergence control because those winter annuals are already up. So post-emergence means after they're up. Right. So then we're going into winter, and winter is sort of downtime, but it's also a time to reassess and think about, well, what worked and what didn't work the previous year. Right. And also to plan for, okay, what are we going to do the following year? So beginning in winter, before your plants start leafing out, that's when we put a fresh layer of mulch out there. If you're going to use pre-emergence herbicides for the spring germinating weeds, that you want to get that out in winter, all right? And then as you come into spring, all that henbit that we didn't control this fall, that's coming up. That's really starting to flower. We want to stop those before they go to seed. So some post-emergence control. Then as we come into spring, our spring grasses like crabgrass are coming up. We can control those before they get big. All right. We don't bother spraying crabgrass now. It's just going to die at frost. It's already making seed. It's just kind of a waste of time, unless you just really need to clean it up. In that case, hand weed it. But better to start early. Also, if you're going with pre-emergence herbicides, we have a long summer. And like this year, a long wet summer. So it often takes multiple pre-emergence herbicide applications to get you through the entire season. So normally we talk about get your first one on in winter, certainly before March the 1st. Your second one goes on sometime in late spring. early summer, so the month of May by the 1st of June. And that's going to carry you through the summer. And then we're back to fall for another cycle. So that's your basic cycle. But let's start plugging in a few details here. So in principle, okay, it's usually better, to try to stay healthy rather than deal with coronary artery disease, right? And so if you extrapolate that metaphor, it's a lot better to prevent weeds from spreading than it is to clean up a weedy area. And one of the growers I worked with, was getting on to me because I hadn't gotten down to their nursery to start this experiment yet. And he tells me, he says, Joe, once you get behind on weeds, you don't catch up again until next year. Yeah. Right. And it's like, I remember that. He was anxious for me to get down there and start that experiment before the weeds got out of hand. And so sanitation and exclusion. Just sanitation in general is really underappreciated because weeds, we want to try and prevent the introduction. So in other words, don't plant weeds. You don't bring, I know we all love sharing our plants and, we see it at the Arboretum, it's the volunteers there at the Arboretum, they're just so passionate about these beautiful plants they have in their garden. And they show up to share the bounty that these plants provide. And why do you think they have so many of these plants to give away? Because they're weedy. Bags and bags and bags of Procosmia. Now, I like Procosmia. It's a pretty flower, does great as a cut flower and gorgeous, but man, does it spread. And yeah, and it's a pain to get rid of. But if you like it, if you love Procosmia, plant it in your garden, just don't get it in your mind. I can admire Procosmia from afar. Yeah, there are lots of definitions of weeds. The bottom line is, it's just a plant you don't want there. Okay. The Chinese elm seedlings coming up in the beds out there, that's a weed. The Chinese elm tree, that's not a weed, that's intentional. All right. So we just, different perspectives. Procosmia. If you like it, keep it. Violets in your yard. Whoa. I love violets in the yard. But if you prefer to have lawn and not violets, then violets are a weed, right? Okay, but back to sanitation. Prevent the introduction. Don't bring them in. There are plants that are weedy that find their way into our landscapes. And then there is the sharing of other plants. So when you bring in a load of topsoil, that topsoil is not sterile. That came from a field, probably an agricultural field. And they've got weeds. So you're bringing in weeds. All right, you buy a ball and burlap shrub or tree. Look at that ball. And very commonly, you're going to have weeds no matter what. You buy a container grown plant, there are going to be weeds in it. That's guaranteed. And a lot of times, even the greenhouse grown plants, they've got weeds in there. In greenhouses, they have oxalis and bittercress. They're shooting their seeds all over. So you're going to be bringing in weeds. Be more careful about what you do bring in. That ball and burlap tree, look at the weeds that are growing there. If you've got these creeping perennial weeds that are coming out of the root ball, you got mugwort and bindweed and Johnson grass coming out of that root ball. Oh my gosh, just thank you, but no thanks. Choose a different one. But we don't want to bring them in. But once you've got them, you want to manage weeds before they spread and before they go to seed. So here is, ground ivy. It encroaches from the lawn. It grows in the landscape bed and grows back into the lawn. It comes in from your neighbor. So ground ivy is an example. That's spreading weed. You want to control it before it gets a chance to get all up in your Procosmia bed, right? Oxalis and a lot of our landscape and nursery weeds have the ability to spread themselves. Okay. Oxalis in particular will shoot at seed up to 12 feet. Bittercrest can shoot at seed 6 feet. Some spurges can send their seed flying for 6 to 8 feet. And so sometimes it's really important just to manage those before they spread. And this one right here is a great example of a weed that requires attention even when it's small, right? This is called mulberry weed. And what you see in that image right there circled are flower heads. I want to call your attention to this, since here's the cotyledon is down here at the bottom. And so there's the cotyledon, then you have the first leaf. That's the second leaf has a flower head in it. And this thing is no more than 1 inch tall at this stage. Okay. And it only takes 12 days for that to go from emergence to releasing its first seeds. So I joke about this one. Who remembers the Star Trek episode, The Trouble with Tribbles?
Oh, yeah.
Right. If some young faces in here may not know that one, you gotta get onto MeTV and start watching those old reruns. The Troubles with Tribbles, and so those of you who know it, when Captain Kirk goes to Bones and says, "Bones, what is it that makes these things tick?" What was his answer? "Jim, I think they're born pregnant." So this is the tribble of the plant world here, man. It just reproduces fast and it shoots at seed up to 4 feet. Now, obviously, that one that's 1 inch tall is not going to shoot at seed 4 feet because it's just not enough trajectory. Yeah, who took physics? Who did well in physics? You can explain it to all the rest of us. Yeah. There are some plants are going to come in. You just can't keep 100% out. Even though pokeweed, this is a good example, pokeweed seeds are dispersed by birds, right? But the vast majority of those seeds land very close to the parent plant. So even a wind dispersed weed like dandelion, everybody knows dandelion. It's like, yay, pick it up. Everybody did that as a kid, right? And if your dad loved his nice lawn, he's like, spread that dandelion all over the place. But a dandelion seed head, if you watch closely, the vast majority of those seeds are dropping right there beside the parent plant. Goldenrod, it's tall and it's got these seed heads that are wind dispersed seeds, but 90% of the seeds drop within 5 feet of parent plant. Some of them get caught up in the wind and go for miles. Okay. But the vast majority fall within 5 to 6 feet, certainly within 10 feet of the parent plant. And so even wind dispersed seeds, the principle of sanitation in your immediate area really can make a difference. And that's why it drives, those of us who like to have a nice lawn, and weed free. Some people like that. My yard is all weeds. Power shoes. It's all weeds. But some people, my neighbor across the street has this immaculate zoysia lawn. It drives him bonkers to get one dandelion in there. And right next door to him, got some new neighbors that love the idea of the wilding of the landscape. Drives him absolutely bonkers because all these weeds are just flowing in. But he's going to get the last laugh because he's got zoysia. And there's no barrier between them. And zoysia is already making its march in, and it's just going to put a stop to that wilding eventually. It'll take a little while, but eventually. But sanitation is really actually quite important. To manage these weeds, particularly annual weeds, before they go to seed. Okay. So speaking of annual weeds, let's talk first about our approaches to weed management. And with annual weeds, our first approach to managing them is mulch. Most of our weed seeds require light to germinate. Okay, and it doesn't take much light. You know, a pigweed seed requires just a few picoseconds of light to stimulate the process of germination. But if there's no light, there's no germination. The seed will remain dormant in the soil for 50 years, but it's not going to germinate until it gets turned up. So once you mulch, you know, you put that mulch down, you exclude light. Okay, so a lot of weeds, we're going to get control with mulches. How much mulch? You need enough to exclude light. And somebody actually did some research on this and figured out, okay, with no mulch, we have all of this weed cover. With a 3-inch layer of bark mulch, we had very little. With 6 inches, there was even less. And so then you get into the point of diminishing returns. As you keep adding mulch and adding mulch and adding mulch, the weeds start growing in the mulch, right? That's what happens. So the sweet spot for around woody trees and shrubs, you want to maintain about a 3 to 4 inch layer of mulch. Any more than that, it's not cost effective. And it's, like I said, as the mulch degrades, you start getting the weeds just grow in the mulch. All right, so we know about how much we need to plant, but there are some weed seeds that don't require light to germinate. And they're perfectly happy growing in the mulch, right? And the mulches are not going to control perennial weeds. In fact, they make life so much better for perennials because they get rid of the crabgrass and the nutsedge can just go crazy. All right, so sometimes if mulches are not enough, we're going to need to do something about it. And besides hand weeding, we have herbicides, and there are pre-emergence herbicides. That means before the weeds germinate. And that's how mulches work, right? Before the weeds germinate, we exclude light. But there are herbicides that will stop those seedlings from getting established. They don't stop seeds from germinating, but they stop that young seedling from growing beyond the, just the radical coming out of the seed coat, right? But we want to make sure, particularly because you're dealing primarily with consumer audiences, we've got to make sure that if you're going to recommend an herbicide, it's got to be safe on the plants that they have in the area. And most of the time, of course, if that's a vegetable garden, the answer is no, go hand weed. So no, we usually don't use pre-emergence herbicides in a vegetable garden area. Now, commercial vegetable production, yes. But in a home vegetable garden, we don't usually recommend that. But in the landscape beds, there are a number of things that we can do. Okay, there are also post-emergence herbicides. These are herbicides that control the weeds after they've come up. Okay, so very simple terminology there. Okay, and we'll go into some more detail. Generally speaking, turfgrass, herbicides labeled for use in turf grass, we don't recommend for use in landscape beds, and there are exceptions, primarily in our pre-emergence herbicides. A lot of pre-emergence herbicides are labeled for both landscape beds and turf grass. So it makes it a little easier for you if you're spreading a pre-emergence herbicide for crabgrass control in your lawn and a little bit gets over into your landscape bed, no big deal. It's probably labeled for use in that landscape bed as well. Pre-emergence herbicides. What is a pre-emergence? How do we use it? Basically, you're putting out this product that is going to create a barrier on the surface of the soil. It has to be uniformly applied, and then it has to move into the soil. Okay, rainfall is usually or irrigation. It's going to move it into the soil. It's going to wash it through the mulch layer and get it right down to the soil level where the weeds germinate. Most of the weeds are germinating in the top half inch of that soil. And the vast majority are germinating right there towards the surface. A herbicide moves into that area, binds with the organic matter and the clay and the soil right in that layer and stays there. If a pre-emergence herbicide was water soluble and leached and washed away, it wouldn't work, right? So our products have been selected for their ability to stay right there. But the important thing is it has to be a uniform application, and it's it's going to work on those seeds that are germinating right in that layer, but it's not going to work very well on weeds that germinate from below that layer. So there are large seeded weeds like morning glory is a great example. You'll find that morning glory is not very well controlled with pre-emergence herbicide. It's not that the herbicide doesn't work on morning glory. A lot of them don't, but we have products that work on morning glory, but the morning glory is germinating from an inch or 2 inches down in the soil and can push its way right through and keep growing. Okay, so even our pre-emergence herbicides are not 100%. One, they're selective; they control some weeds better than others, and then there are other reasons like this that a weed seed that is coming from deep in the soil can come through it. So they can control lots and lots of weeds. Okay, but what kinds of products are out there? Well, there are lots and lots of pre-emergence herbicides that are labeled. Okay, lots and lots of pre-emergence. The most widely used herbicides in landscape settings, snapshot, freehand, pendulum, barricade, and spectacle. These are no need to write all these down. They're mainly used in by commercial enterprises. Okay, and again, how do we use them in landscapes? Or in a turf grass setting? You apply in February, then come back in May, and then you do another one in September to control the winter weeds. All about the life cycles of the weeds, right? But like I said, there are lots and lots of chemicals that are available for commercial users. Okay, most of these are actually, if a homeowner wanted to use them, they can. They're not restricted use. Okay, but because they are really targeting commercial operators. For example, if we said, okay, well, I would really prefer to use Spectacle. Okay, I've read really good stuff about Spectacle. It's a really good herbicide, pre-emergence for use in lawns and Bermuda grass lawns and some landscape settings. You can go down to John Deere Landscapes and buy retail from Site One, excuse me, I've changed the name, Site One. You can buy it. It's legal for any homeowner to shop there and purchase this material. It's not restricted use. But the smallest bottle they sell costs somewhere between $500 and $600. Okay. And so that's one way that it's not going to be in the consumer marketplace, and no consumer should buy this because that small bottle of Spectacle would last a typical homeowner would last at least 10 years, right? And you don't want chemicals hanging around in your shed that long, right? You want to use them. So what do you use in retail and consumer markets? If you're using pre-emergence herbicides, there are really about two products that are widely used: pendimethalin and trifluralin. Okay, sold as a preen product line, and the pendimethalin is included in lots of different formulations. Right. These are very similar products. They work on a lot of our really common weeds. Annual bluegrass, henbit, chickweed are all very well controlled. Okay, but there are some weeds that these products do not work very well on. Okay, violet in particular. So if you need something that's a little bit more aggressive, there is a commercial product called Snapshot, but the same active ingredients are available in some consumer products. Okay, so there are consumer versions of this. But a rule of thumb, if the herbicide works really well on broadleaf weeds, there's a higher probability that it will injure your tender ornamental plants. Okay, so we're balancing things here. Okay, the trifluralin and the pendimethalin are pretty safe on most ornamental plants, but because they're safe on most ornamental plants, remember what I said, rule of thumb. They are not going to control morning glory. They're not going to control violet very well. They're going to miss some of the plants. Okay. So just a review, when I said, trifluoralin, I have in parentheses preen. Well, preen is a trademark. And that trademark, it can be applied to any number of active ingredients. All right, so preen southern weed preventer is not the same as preen weed preventer organic for vegetable gardens. And that is not the same as the preen plus mulch herbicide combination impregnated on mulch. And that's different than the standard preen garden weed preventer. They all have different active ingredients. But generally speaking, these products are all going after the seeds. Any chemical we put out there can have some unintended consequences, but herbicides have been selected to kill plants. And as a pesticide class, they do tend to have a much lower toxicity to insects, aquatic life, and there are exceptions. There are herbicides that are toxic to aquatic life, and they're not labeled for use in aquatic settings. They will have specific guidelines. Do not use within 50 feet of a riparian or a water area. So the active ingredient matters, right? This formulation contains trifluoralin, okay? That one, can actually be, triplan can be used on a wide range of ornamental plants, including some vegetables. So you could actually, if you wanted to, if you had a big vegetable garden, you're tired of hoeing, this particular one you could use on vegetables. This one, on the other hand, should never be used around any food crops, because one of the active ingredients, isoxaben, doesn't have any what they call tolerances, doesn't have any residue tolerances for use in food crops, and would damage most of your vegetables. So the active ingredient makes a difference. All right. Now, and just looking at these products, the consumer-oriented products, this is just some data that we generated. Fresh weights of weeds. If you just hand weeded, we got lots of weeds. We grow some pig weeds, absolutely magnificent pig weed at our research farm. And we use the preen for southern gardens, and it cut it, by 2/3 or 3/4, right? And then we use some mulch with no herbicide at all, and it was actually even better. Why is that? Pigweed requires light to germinate. Okay, but it wasn't 100%. And when we used the preen mulch plus that has the herbicide and the mulch together, kaboom! We have best weed control. And so that's mulches work. They're not always 100%. All right. In order for these products to work, you have to apply them uniformly. This photo was taken when I walked outside of my office and looked at, what had been done on campus. So really good weed control right there. A little too much, right? So uniform application, and I'm just going to give a secret on how to get uniform application is you measure the area, and then you calculate how much do I need for this area. If the bag says this covers 5,000 square feet, we don't spread the whole bag on the space the size of this room. We figure out, well, how many square feet are in here, and then you call the math major to help you with ratio algebra, right? Everybody can do ratio algebra. I found out that statement is false. Not everybody remembers ratio algebra. And so it's simple ratio algebra. If you have trouble with that, then talk to a friend who's good at math. And you just figure out, okay, this says it covers 5,000 square feet. My area is only 1,000 square feet. I only need half of that bag, right? Yeah. Thank you. I need 1/5 of that bag, right? Right. And then you take that 1/5 of that bag and you take half of that and put it in your spreader. and you spread back and forth and back and forth and back and forth all over the area until all of that's gone. Then you put the other half in, you think, and you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth several times. And if you do that, if you cover the area at least 3 or 4 times in that way with a spreader of any sort, you're going to have a pretty uniform application. Don't try to do it in one pass. You're always going to miss something, you're going to overdose. Just do it multiple times. Go over, with a light application many times, and you're going to end up with a uniform spread. As simple as that. Takes a little longer, but you get it done right. Okay. All right. So what about corn gluten? You're going to get that question. You may have that question yourself. What is it? It's a protein fraction of cornmeal. There is a herbicidal component to it. It is a tripeptide. So 3 amino acids locked together, a small little molecule. Okay. Recommended use is 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And that costs about, but depending on where you buy it, 35 to 50 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Typical $400 for a typical 6,000 square foot lawn. So it's not cheap. But does it work? The simple answer is no. And we've tested this. And so this is data from our work in a Bermuda grass lawn. Does it work? The answer is no. We had where we used pendimethalin, standard herbicide for crabgrass control. We had 97% crabgrass control. Where we used corn gluten, we had luxurious crabgrass. Why? Because corn gluten is an organic fertilizer. It's a very good fertilizer. I forget what the percent nitrogen is on it, but when you're using corn gluten, you're adding an organic fertilizer. So this was in Bermuda grass. What about in cool season turf? Remember, crabgrass is germinating in the spring. Okay, if our turf grass, so Bermuda grass is dormant in the spring when crabgrass is germinating. So every bit of corn gluten nitrogen we put out there was taken up by the crabgrass that was germinating, because the Bermuda grass was still dormant. What if it's a tall fescue lawn or any other cool season turf, right? My colleagues, and actually my former student, Frank Rossi, did a study up at Cornell to compare corn gluten with fertilizer, and this is the percent crabgrass control in cool season turf. And so what he found was the corn gluten was equally effective at suppressing crabgrass as an equivalent fertilizer program. So it's the fertility response in cool season turf that provides some level, and in this case, 60% control of the crabgrass. So corn gluten is a fertilizer, and it works really well in that way. Okay, so bottom line, it's not an effective treatment for crabgrass control. All right, what about after the weeds emerge? Okay, we have hand weeding, we have hose, okay, and this is a true story. Anybody recognize these guys? And this is our former department head. He was a weed scientist. He was co-chair of my advisory committee, Dr. Monaco. And what you don't see is our floriculture specialist off to the other side that says, "Hey, Tom, Bryce, I just planted those." It's a true story. And actually, I showed this to Bryce, and he laughed and he says, "It's okay for me to use this." Just so I hope he's still okay with it, because I get a lot of mileage out of this picture. So, we're going to have hand weeding, but as I showed earlier, we want to weed before they go to seed. Okay, for the little tribble of the plant world, we need to get out there and get rid of that puppy pretty soon. Even when it's little, you got to be watchful on that one, all right? But if you've got this horseweed, it takes several months to go from this to flowering. So it's like, I'll get you next time. right? It's not as urgent, but there are some weeds that it is urgent to go ahead and control them when they're very small. Okay. All right, with post-emergent herbicides, all right, sometimes you want to get rid of them. You're tired of hand weeding, you're tired of hoeing. Sometimes we use herbicides. We have both contact action and systemic herbicides. What's the difference? Contact only affects the plants the foliage that it touches. Systemic, it moves from those leaves down into the plant and translocates within the plant. All right. So controlling annual weeds, a lot of times our contact action products will work just fine if you catch them when they're very young. But sometimes you need some systemic if those weeds get larger, or grasses are hard to kill with contact action products. Right? So we do have selective products that control grasses, grassy weeds. So you got crabgrass growing in your ground cover beds. We have selective grass products that you can spray right over top of your liriape bed and take that grass out. Big old patch of Johnson grass in the liriape out in the parking lot. We can take that Johnson grass right out of that liriape without damaging the liriape with a selective grass herbicide. The dandelions and the false dandelion, cat's ear dandelion growing in that same liriape bed, we do not have anything that is selective that we can kill that broadleaf weed in the liriape. We just don't have that selective product. So normally we're going with non-selective herbicides for dandelion control. We just don't have these selective options. All right, so let's dig a little deeper. So what is non-selective? Non-selective means it's going to kill or damage in some way with wild abandon, right? It's going to kill or damage any plant that you spray it on. So if you get a little bit of it on your hosta, it's going to damage that. These are non-selective, right? And there are lots of products out there. Contact action and systemic. The most common systemic, of course, you're familiar with glyphosate. Sprayed on the leaves, translocates down to the roots. Vinegar, sprayed on the leaves, it burns that leaf that it touched and doesn't go anywhere else. Advantages and disadvantages for all of these products, right? So again, contact only burns what it touches. Systemic, it can get to the roots. Now, and that has implications for both weed control, but also your plant safety. So a little bit of spray drift from a contact action herbicide is going to make leaf spots. A little bit of spray drift from a systemic herbicide like glyphosate is going to cause much more damage. Right? So it works better on the weeds, but it might cause more injury if you get a little on your ornamental plants. About these natural products, vinegar is the most common one. There are lots and lots of different materials on the market that are natural oils mixed with vinegar, natural acid materials, and they all work. And they all work about the same. And they're contact action. So they're just going to burn the leaves that they touch. And that also they will control very young plants, but as they get larger, they're not as effective. So vinegar, acetic acid, I'm not going to belabor this other than to point out household vinegar has anybody know how much acetic acid? You've got 4, 5, 6, up to 7% household vinegar. That's up to tops 7% acetic acid. The research has been done. You need 10% acetic acid to really have effective weed control. So it's not a matter of going, buying, just a jug of white vinegar from the grocery store. You need to go to the garden center and get the horticultural vinegar that is usually closer to 20% acetic acid. And when you start getting 20% acetic acid, remember it says acid. Okay, and this stuff can burn your skin. Certainly, you want to keep wear eye protection when you're handling it, and you don't want to breathe any of the vapors, right? But these products, they work on very young seedlings. You'll have to come back and reapply. on perennial weeds or larger annual weeds, it just burns the foliage and the weed grows right back. So, but if you keep after it, it'll keep working. Okay. So this ragweed, dead, one application usually. This one, you're not going to kill it. You can keep defoliating it, but it'll keep growing back. So this one, acetic acid, you know, the natural products, burn that right out. This one, reach down, pull it out. Right. Again, that's just, you know, the spray volume. You need a good coverage. So this just shows with a low spray volume, the weed control was not as good as if we used twice as much water. So basically, you know, it's contact action. So you got to cover all the leaves. You got to cover it really well to get the weed control. And again, they're non-selective. All of these products, the natural products that are on the shelf, they're non-selective, they're contact action, and they're more expensive than synthetic herbicides. They're also, I mentioned, not safe to handle. This is the caution on the weed farm acetic acid weed killer. Wear goggles or a face shield. Harmful if absorbed through skin, harmful if swallowed. Do not get in the eyes, on skin, on clothing. In case of contact, immediately flush skin with plenty of water. Required personal protective equipment when used, when applying it, eye protection, waterproof gloves, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, you know, when you're using these natural products, you know, it's all natural, but you know, that, you know, acid is natural, but it still is can be hazardous to handle. So be careful with it. The other synthetic materials, there are lots of products. Most widely used historically has been glyphosate. Glyphosate is no longer available for retail. What they have done is if you go out and buy Roundup, it is now triclopyr with fusilade plus diquat. So triclopyr is used for killing trees and shrubs on roadsides. Okay, it is a broadleaf weed killer. Okay. The other thing is there's absolutely nothing in this mixture that will control nutsedge. So this is not going to work as well on nutsedge. It's not going to control perennial grasses. So if you get a clump of tall fescue growing in your bed, you want to get rid of it, you just go get a shovel, because this is not going to control it. And so it's when I look at the garden center shelf today, you know, I don't recommend this, you know, and I actually, you know, would recommend instead, I recommend you go with the acetic acid or the natural products. You know, they're going to provide, they're not going to provide quite as good a weed control, of course, but there's much less risk of damage to your landscape plants with those materials. But this just example, we go out, this is the old label, glyphosate plus pelargonic acid. This is the new label. It looks identical, right? And so when you go to the garden center, you think you're getting the same thing you had before, but it is not. Now you can go to Site One and buy yourself some glyphosate, but these new products are not as good on nutsedge, but they're going to actually work better on poison ivy.
Okay.
Because triclopyr is our best product for poison ivy control. And it has been the standard ingredient in all of the ortho poison ivy, poison oak killer products that are out there.